Hello, MotoAmerica fans. It's time for another episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you may even learn something from this unlikely pair and their special guest. The mic is yours, Paul and Sean.
Hello, MotoAmerica fans, and welcome to the latest episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I am not Carruthers, as if you couldn't tell. I am Bice. And Carruthers is with me. I'm in Central Ohio. He's in Southern California. Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Good. It's they could probably tell it wasn't me because you sound so professional. You didn't cuss. You didn't drop an F-bomb or anything. So they're like, "Oh, that's not Paul. That's got to be Sean, the nice guy in Ohio."
I had this weird thing happen when we were at Laguna last year. I don't know. I was talking to somebody, and all of a sudden, some random guy came up to me and said, "Hey, you're Sean Bice. I recognize your voice." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's a terrible thing to be known for." So, but I don't know.
That's
whatever.
funny. I don't know if I told you this, but one of our volunteer guys, he was with us for it's like the first 2 years. Apparently, he thought I was Doug Chandler. Until finally he actually came and talked to me and, "Hey Doug, how's it going?" And I didn't want to be rude, so I kind of let it go. But then he started asking me stuff, and finally I'm just like, "Hey, I'm not Doug Chandler." And of course he felt really bad, but yeah.
No surprise there, but nobody's ever mistaken me for a motorcycle racer. So
yeah,
I don't have the same problem.
At least my size, I guess they could.
Right.
And Doug and I are about the same age, but he's just a little more successful than I am and a little bit better motorcycle racer, I guess.
Yeah. So, hey, I want to mention off the bat here. We have Jensen Beeler on today, who has a website called Asphalt and Rubber. He does podcasts, and we get to see him when we go to our rounds sometimes. For sure, he's usually at Laguna Seca, and I usually get to have a conversation with him. I read his stuff. He's got a sense of humor and a bit of an acerbic wit, but I want to do a little preamble on this. But first of all, I want to say hi to Jensen, and before I kind of do this whole thing, hey Jensen, how you doing?
Hey Sean, I'm good. How are you? Am I on the right podcast? I was told Doug Chandler was going to be on this one. Is this? Did I call into the wrong one? I don't know.
Yeah. You're funny.
I don't know, a podcast featuring Doug Chandler. He's a man of very few words. I don't know if you could get a half an hour out of him.
I honestly, you couldn't find two different people than me and Doug Chandler's as far as the talking or speaking part of life. He's a quiet, deep thinker, I think, and I'm a loud non-thinker. Does that work?
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. So anyway, I want to get into this one thing. I actually talked with Matthew Miles yesterday. I had called him right after he had put a post on Facebook. So he's like Paul. Paul was with Cycle News for 30 years. Matthew was with Cycle World for 29 years. And it's kind of bugging me that he didn't, get to 30, but that's
I'm glad I kicked his ass in that.
There you go. There you go.
It turns out, he's just a wuss. He couldn't make it 30.
And people probably know, Bonnier Corporation had bought that. It's changed hands a little bit. And, Matthew's a great friend of ours, all three of ours, I think. Jensen, Matthew well too, right?
Yes, very well. Yeah. I was sad to see that he was leaving Cycle World.
Yeah, it was a bummer. And then so anyway, when I was talking to Matthew yesterday, we kind of caught up on some things, and he brought up a couple things that made me think a little bit. Now, not to get way back in the past, but I will say real quick, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a journalist, and I quickly ended up kind of on a path towards being an advertising copywriter, which morphed into PR. And I think some of it has to do with, I generally don't like to do stories that are exposing some, bad side of something. I tend to be the type of person that always likes to kind of promote things. I mean, obviously, you do that in copywriting, in advertising. You're trying to persuade people to purchase the product or service, and PR is the same way. A lot of it, it's a little different in some ways, but it's certainly promoting the brand or whatever you're talking about. And so Matthew and I had this conversation about the fact that he's saying the way things have evolved in journalism in general, and certainly in journalism related to motorcycles, is he talked about, he'd get a press release and he would generally that he'd get in touch with either somebody who was quoted in it or the PR person that sent it and try to set up an interview to try to get some more information about, the subject matter of the press release. Because most times press releases are not complete. They sort of just provide a tool for journalists to use. That's changed a lot. Now I'll mention Road Racing World. They're sort of known. When we send them press releases for MotoAmerica, or when a team sends it to them, David Swartz, who works on that website, they post that stuff verbatim, even with warts and all sometimes. And it's just their way of doing things. And it's taken something that was really at one time only intended to be viewed by an editor and used to create a story, and it's now being seen by the general public. So it changes the way I think some press releases are written. There's a little bit more, I guess, editorializing involved in that. And I wanted to talk to Jensen, to you about it, and Paul as well. We're all journalists. Well, I'm not. I'm more PR, but have a background in advertising, like I said. Jensen, when you get a press release, and we know you run our stuff sometimes. Your site, I want to ask you about your site, because it's certainly different than Road Racing World. I think that you take stuff that is created by or put in a press release and you do sort of repurpose it or write it. And it seems like your stuff there's a little bit of, I'm going to say editorializing. There's some sense of humor involved in it sometimes. How does it work when you get a press release? And I want to kind of talk about how that's changed over the years.
That's an interesting question, Sean. It's like the nerdiest topic about journalism that I could probably speak about for hours. It's a strange thing. My back it up a little bit. My philosophy with asphalt and rubber is that we are a lens that views the motorcycling world around us, which I think is different than you bring up Road Racing World. Yes. Which I would say is more rooted in traditional journalist ideas of being neutral regarding their stories or trying to alleviate any bias. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. We study bias very carefully, and quite frankly, the concept of having no bias is a false concept. And so my perspective would be, I would rather show my bias or show my opinion flagrantly so that my reader, who is an intelligent human being, can see what my opinion is and see what my perspective is and decide if they agree with it or not. And that kind of trickles down into how we view press releases. As I view a press release as the rose-colored glasses of whoever is talking to me. When you write a press release to me about MotoAmerica, I assume that you're going to publish or print the most favorable thing possible to MotoAmerica, and that's your perspective, and it's my job as a journalist to distill what parts of that is correct and what part of that might be glossing over the warts, as you said. So our policy, whenever possible, is to not publish a press release in its raw form, because I don't want to be a podium for you to put your spin out there. Now, sometimes a press release itself is the story, and so it has to be included for context. I definitely will use quotes and information from a press release. If there's something confusing or if I have a follow-up question, I'll call whoever published that press release and try to get some follow-up or some clarity. But usually we're grounded more in what our writers and what their opinion on the issue is. And that's what kind of leads us forward.
Mm-hmm. Now, Paul, regarding Cycle News, I mean, with you, when you were there and even now, would you say that they are a little more towards traditional moto journalism like Road Racing World is, or do you think where are they at, do you think?
Well, I can only really talk about when I was running the ship over there, so to speak. What I ended up doing, the press releases got to be my initial thing with press releases is, look, I want all of these rewritten, take what's there. I mean, at 90% of the time you can rewrite somebody's press release better than what they wrote it, because as we all know, some of them aren't very good. But
Right.
It got to be the point where there was just so many that I'm like, okay, look, this is what we're doing. We're going to have a press release section over on the side of the homepage. Those are press releases. Company X has hired Billy Bob to be the marketing director. Okay, though I'm not going to say they're not important, but they're not as important as the ones that we would choose and say, okay, this is actually this has the potential to be a news story. So let's rewrite that as we would a news story. If we need to make calls to get some more questions answered, then so be it. But let's use those as the basis of a story. So we would have our homepage, and the stories that were on that homepage would be stories that sometimes started as press releases that we've rewritten, or else they're just they were features or interviews or news stories that we came up with from scratch on our own. But then off to the side, we would have the press release section that I would basically say, and we do the same thing on MotoAmerica.com now, is the following is from Suzuki, and it kind of, I think that lets the reader know, like, hey, this is a press release from Suzuki, so take it for what it's worth. Whereas the other stories on the homepage, I would like them to believe that, like, okay, these guys have done a little more digging, they've rewritten it in a nicer way, and it's more of a news story than the other ones. So that's kind of the policy I had with it at Cycle News, and it seemed to work pretty well. Now I'm on the other side of the fence, and I'm writing the press releases. And I'm writing press releases from everything that's, we've hired somebody in the marketing department or whatever. And I use the word department loosely because we would only have one guy in that. So I'm not sure that would make a department. But so with that, like when I sit down, and you're next to me right there on a Saturday or Sunday night at our events. When I sit down and write a press release that goes out to mostly motorcycle media, I try to write those like I would basically write my race reports that I used to do for Cycle News. I try to make them so when I write those press releases, I try to make it so that the guy who's using it can actually use it the way the easiest way for him to do it. And that means providing as much information in there as I can, writing it well enough that he could cut and paste if that's what he chooses to do, or he could use that as the basis for his story, depending on how much rewriting he wants to do. And I actually take pride in the fact of, like, when I see a Cycle News and they haven't really messed with it too much, I'm like, okay, I did a pretty good job there. But that comes from years and years and years of writing those race reports. I mean, I could do them in my sleep. So I try to just do the job that I used to do with those press releases now. So like I said, if it makes it easier for a publication or a website to use your press release, then they're going to. Some places, if something comes across their desk and it requires a lot of work, maybe they don't have enough time, and so they don't use it at all. So my goal is for them to use the information that we provide.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we get press releases from the teams, and it's no surprise probably that some of them, some need a little bit of work, some help. And I think we're a little different from certainly road racing world, but not quite like asphalt and rubber. What we do is we'll take the release and we'll just make sure that it doesn't have any, glaring grammatical things, misspellings, or things that don't make sense. But for the most part, we try to stay true to what the team provided. But we're a different situation. We're not as much a news outlet as we are promoting our series. So we have one specific goal in mind, and it's to put our teams and riders in the best light possible. So with that in mind, here's my next question for Jensen. And Jensen, this kind of goes to you how you handle things on your website, and you're sort of you have a lens that you use with the stuff that you produce. So here's the $64,000 question, or whatever it would be now that it's been adjusted for inflation. So regarding journalism and regarding our industry, we know what's going on in our motorcycle industry. We know, it's had its problems, and it's, seems to be coming back a little bit, but maybe not so much at times. And we worry about it every day because I think we all rely on it for our livelihoods as well as our passion. So Jensen, what I want to ask you is, with your website, your podcast, or what you write, do you feel in any way that you have a part or have to prop up the series or speak about them in a positive light because you're in it. So you don't want to speak badly of something that kind of puts food on your table, so to speak. Where do you land on that?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I came to this as a consumer, as an enthusiast, as a motorcyclist. And, it's funny you said, that I'm a part of it, because sometimes I feel like I'm still on the outside. And that, I think, kind of helps balance the idea that you could be taking food off of your own table. But I very much have that David Attenborough sort of perspective of, I just approach it from the idea that, good or bad, I just want to tell it how it is. I just want to be as honest as I can. I want to say exactly what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling about a certain subject. And if that's, not good for the industry as a whole or not good for a particular brand, so be it. I look at that as a short-term issue. I think in the long term, we're better off as an industry if we have honest and accurate and truthful journalism. You can't sit there and expect to only have positive stories. If bike reviews would be a great example. If I only said every bike I rode was the best bike I'd ever ridden, it almost dilutes the work that the manufacturers have put into that motorcycle to make it, as good as it can be. You want to be evaluated fairly. You want to be evaluated on the same scorecard as your peers. You want to know that the news that you're reading isn't just all sunshine and rainbows, because we can see it in current events, even when negative things are downplayed, the detriment that can do to the society. And I think of it the same way with the motorcycle industry. So I think you have to talk about the bad to make sure that, or you have to talk about the bad in order to give weight for when things are good. I feel like that's my number one job as a journalist, is to call it the way I see it because of that reason.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with Jensen on this, because obviously I used to do the same thing. You would test motorcycles, and honestly, I mean, when I first started, the job was easier because the motorcycles weren't as good, if that makes sense. You get to the point where the motorcycles are so good, and you find yourself like looking, like, okay, there's got to be something wrong here, and usually there is. And the thing, I think you gain respect from not only your readership, but also the manufacturers when you point things out that aren't right, because they know if you say bike A doesn't have very good brakes, I guarantee the manufacturer who produced bike A knows the brakes aren't very good. They've tested the other bikes that it's being compared against. They've obviously tested their own bike, and they know that there's a deficiency with their brakes. So if you gloss over that, or if you don't call them out for the fact that their brakes aren't very good, they know it. And what kind of respect do they have for you? Because they know that when you're talking about a competitive brand, you're probably doing the same with them and not pointing out what's actually wrong with it. So it's like you can get caught up in that web, and it's just, I think what my philosophy with the whole thing when I was at Cycle News was just to treat things fairly. And that means if things are bad, you tell it that they're bad. If things are good, you say that they're good. And I think if you follow that line and you don't have an axe to grind and you have no favors with one particular brand over another, I mean, how can anybody find fault with that?
Paul, do you feel like that standard is still the same today as it was when you were at Cycle News? That in regards to how the manufacturers appreciate, let's say, honest feedback?
I don't know, because I'm removed from it at this point, but I would hope that they're the same. I don't know if the changing of the guard with the PR people that are involved or whatever have kind of, I don't want to say dumb that down, where maybe they don't have the same respect for somebody pointing out the bad things, or if they even know that the bad things are bad. So I can't really speak to that, but my hope is that the things are the same. But again, I'm just a little bit removed from it, so I don't really know.
Jensen, you and I have had the conversation. I'm not going to name any names, but over the past few years, we've had conversations before about situations where, every OEM probably thinks that every one of their products is fantastic, and they expect that when a website or magazine does a review that they're going to speak in platitudes about that product without compromise. And you don't do that, Jensen. And I think some OEMs sometimes aren't very happy about that. But to Paul's point, it's not fair because they probably can admit. Man, I'll give you a quick little story. I rode a bike. I'm not going to say what it was. I rode a bike, recent model motorcycle a couple years ago, and it was really stupid. I would come to a stop, like put my feet down, and the foot pegs were in the wrong position. They would always like either bark my shins, and you couldn't put your feet in front of them or behind them. It was the worst placement of foot pegs ever. And I thought to myself, my entire career has been about advertising, copywriting, and PR, putting a positive spin on something. And if I had to write the brochure for that thing, I would have had to, conveniently ignore it and feel bad about doing it, because that to me was a huge design flaw in that motorcycle. And if I was doing a review on it, I would have absolutely called it out, because it was almost unwritable because of that. And to your point, or to the point I want to make to you, Jensen, you've had these kinds of things happen before, right?
Yeah, I kind of asked Paul a loaded question just because in my experience, I don't think the manufacturers right now are, and I understand I'm making a very large blanket statement. I think there's different actors and different manufacturers and they treat it differently. But I would say in general, the motorcycle manufacturers aren't terribly interested in, let's say, constructive feedback. And their response can differ. Sometimes I get a phone call and they'll say, hey, I disagree with X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about it. And, you kind of list your reasons and maybe there's some back and forth. And, I'll be honest, if a manufacturer makes a really good case about why I was wrong, I'll admit I was wrong. But that doesn't seem to happen too often. But there's been other times where there's been glaring issues with a motorcycle. I actually think of two instances off the top of my head where you mention something that is wrong with a motorcycle, you publish it, and the PR guy goes, down your throat about it, and they want you to retract the story or change the story, and you're sitting there and you go like, no, this is definitely doing this. This is definitely an issue. You're going to have a recall or worse, X number of months down the road with this. Like, you guys need to get on it. And you go and you talk to an engineer, a couple of days later, and they go, oh yeah, we've known about that issue for a few, weeks or months now. That's something we're working on. And you sit there and it's like, well, then why are you getting on my case about it if it's known internally? But I think at the end of the day, especially if you're in PR, you're marketing, like your desk, your table is all about putting the best light forward on your product, and your job is to be an advocate for your motorcycles or your helmet or your gloves or whatever it is that you're responsible for. And, I don't know how all the companies work, but there's probably some sort of incentivization to that, or at least there's someone overseeing them that's saying like, hey, why is Jensen writing that story? Or why is Paul writing that story? Why aren't they on board with us? But I think it's gone too far. We've lost our way a little bit, because it does seem that the expectation is that the journalist isn't there to give a fair and unbiased review of the product. It, to me, often feels like the journalist is at the press launch to act as our outsourced marketing department. And, to that vein, we're starting to see that social media influencers are starting to get put into the mix with journalists at press launches. And, that to me just it shows that OEM's mindset to a T, because that social media influencer is literally an employee of that company. So you're having an employee evaluate the motorcycle and then publishing it on some third-party website or social media channel to espouse its virtues. I don't. That's really the tough one for me to see, and to see that expectation change, because I don't. At least in my experience, I can't speak for everyone, but in my experience, I don't feel that motorcycle manufacturers and some of the other OEMs particularly care for or want true journalistic inquiries into their products or dealings. Mm-hmm. And that's sad. I think that's really sad.
Yeah. And it's very sad. And I just know, the way I looked at it when I was at Cycle News, and to a degree, even with this job now, is if you were getting the opportunity to go ride a motorcycle, for a company at a press intro, for example, I always figured my job was I was going to be able to ride this motorcycle before anybody else was going to be able to ride that motorcycle. And I'm speaking about the consumers and our readers, et cetera. So I thought my job was to give them as much information and my feelings on what this new motorcycle was like. And then at some point, hopefully, if they were going to purchase that motorcycle, they would get the opportunity to learn more, to ride it themselves or whatever. But you'd also have to realize that you can't just go. We have an opportunity to ride a bunch of different motorcycles and have a lot of different input and make decisions about those motorcycles based on the amount of motorcycles that we've actually got to ride, where the average consumer may not get to do that. So I think if you just go into it and you're just presenting the information and the feelings you got from riding that motorcycle, you might only get to ride the thing for 2 days. Maybe they rush you to the racetrack and you ride it for a day, and then you ride it around some country roads in some foreign country that you're not even, half the time you're just trying to survive. And you've got to evaluate that motorcycle in a very short time. So I think you can only do what you can do, and that's to provide them a fair review based on the amount of time that you got to spend on it. And the watercraft industry taught me a lot when we did when we did Personal Watercraft Illustrated, because they blatantly would cheat. Like, we would do shootouts, and the watercraft would be 2 or 3 miles an hour faster than the stock one, and with a watercraft, the average guy who buys one can actually ride it to the limit. The average guy who buys an R1 can't ride it to the limit. Right. So when you're presenting information about a watercraft that they have radar guns themselves, and they're like, oh, how come yours goes 45 miles an hour and ours only goes 40? Well, right then you look like a fool. So we got to the point with the shootouts that we actually got letters from each manufacturer, and we would go to a random dealership and pick up a stock watercraft off their showroom floor, because that was the only way we could keep control of what was going on with the shootouts. But I mean, that was a different animal, just because, like I said, the average guy knew what that craft was capable of because he owned one and could ride it to the max, where that doesn't happen on a motorcycle. I mean, there's very few people that can put those motorcycles the way they are today, especially a sport bike, and ride it the way that that it's able to be ridden. Anyway, that's just a little side note there. But I mean, it's and I'm sure Jensen hears this all the time about what a dream job he has, and he gets to go ride all these motorcycles. He gets to go to great places to ride them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's by far true. I mean, there's so much stuff I miss about my old job, and one of them is being able to do that. But on the other side, you do have to sit down, and you do have a big responsibility to write a story that you believe is fair and well done. And that's where the work comes into play. So it's not all fun.
It's a charmed life, but yeah, I think you're right, Paul. It's not as glamorous as it would look sometimes. I can distinctly remember a press launch, and what you glossed over too is a lot of these press launches are overseas. A lot of the press launches are in Spain or Italy, especially in the winter months where it's still warm. And I can remember a press launch in France where I was only boots on the ground in France for 22 hours. I spent almost twice as much time in the air as I did on the ground, and literally arrived, and within a few hours it was expected to be on a motorcycle at a racetrack, do the sessions, have a quick bite to eat, and then back on the plane in 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's a very tough thing to ask someone to do, to travel for that long, to be that jet lagged, to do the time change, and then go ride a motorcycle at racetrack speed, and then have to evaluate it and pick it all apart and explain what you felt and what you saw in an intelligible way to someone else, which isn't exactly an easy thing to do either. And then hopefully not get any pushback from the manufacturer on your opinions, and then hopefully have written a good story that your readers enjoy. It's not as easy as it would seem, and it kind of takes the glamour from being in the south of Spain or along the Mediterranean coast or in Africa or wherever that launch might be.
Right.
So here's a question I have for you. Actually, the one other thing I was going to say about that is when Paul mentioned about going to kind of a random dealership and picking up a unit or whatever to test. It's funny, Jensen, so just yesterday you had posted that story about Motorcycle Consumer News, which I have stacks of those in my garage still and relied on their information. And I don't know, I think they used to do that when they would get their bikes, didn't they? Or would they get them from the OEMs like the rest of journalists would do?
My understanding was that they got the bikes from the OEMs, but I can't speak to their whole history. I'm still relatively young compared to some people on this podcast. But that is my understanding. I could certainly be wrong, and correct me if I am. But I would say out of all the publications, Motorcycle Consumer News probably had the most conflict-free method of testing motorcycles, and I'm very envious of that.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right when you said they're kind of the Consumer Reports of the motorcycle industry. I always felt that they were that way too. Okay, so here's another thing I want to talk to you about. I want to switch gears on some stuff a little bit because a couple things. So I know I think we can all agree that when a company or team, brand, OEM, whatever, puts out a press release, generally it's lacking a whole lot of information that you'll either try to get later by testing the bike or trying to find out. And this brings up the fact that when I talked to Matthew Miles yesterday, he said it doesn't seem like a lot of people are following up, to try to get answers to their questions. And I want to bring up this baggers situation that we had, because when that press release came out, I think we're all chuckling. We all probably reacted the same way. We're like, what the hell is this? And we all were, even Paul and I internally were laughing about it a little bit. But, we know what we're trying to do in MotoAmerica. And there are a ton of questions about it. It was, fans don't know what's going on with it. And it brought up, of course, Jensen, not only do you have a podcast and a website, but like all of us, you have a social media channel too. So you would post this crazy 10 things that you want to see happen.
I got a list of demands. I want to see some changes or some ideas incorporated into this. I know you guys are still in the planning stages, so pick and choose from those as you will.
Which I know for sure. Clearly, your tongue is firmly placed in your cheek on a lot of this stuff. But my point is, there are a lot of things that we don't know about it yet. So my question to you, do you think your people, your followers, understood that you were trying to be funny with that? Did you have an axe to grind, or were you just having some fun? Tell me where that was coming from.
Well, first, let's get one thing very clear. I am dead serious about the pie eating contest. I think that needs to happen. I think that should be incorporated. You can get some sort of tie-in with Sara Lee or one of those other brands. It's perfect sponsorship opportunity. Just take that and run with it. No, I mean, obviously, I don't think I have the best sense of humor, but I think I'm funny, so I guess it works out. But that was, that's a little bit of Jensen humor on Twitter and in the comments section. But the feeling is true. The feeling is accurate, and the feeling is real. Because I mean, if I can be really frank with you guys, like, what the heck are you doing with this thing? I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know what the thought process is at MotoAmerica with it. I mean, I have a little bit of an understanding of what goes on behind the scenes. I understand, Parts Unlimited's interest in having something like this. I know this has been in the works or at least talking for a little while now. I can kind of, as a business person, look at it like, okay, well, Harley Davidson's about half the size of the big bike market, and they're our domestic supplier, and we have Indian now, and how are we going to reach these riders? And the aftermarket side of that's obviously very big as well. And how can we get them involved? And, you can kind of turn the gears and back in something that sounds like a good idea, but like the smell test on this for me is just horrible. So other than just like screaming up and down and having like a little internet tantrum, the only way I can process this information is through humor and through a list of demands like a pie eating contest.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Paul, do you want to field that a little bit in terms of what we're trying to do?
Yeah, we can discuss this a little bit. As both of you and whoever's listening knows, we're not MotoGP. We can't. It's not enough for us. We'll never have 100,000 people at our races, but they can have 100,000 people at any of their events show up with pouring rain or bright sunshine, they know the crowd they're going to get, and they get it consistently. They've been doing it for a long time. Their series is immensely popular worldwide. We're not there yet, and our goals are obviously not as lofty as being MotoGP, because in this country that's just not going to happen. So what we do have is we have 5 really serious, good classes of motorcycle road racing at our events. It's proven at this point in time that's not necessarily enough to grow our series. I don't want to say it's a case of sometimes you have to do something that you don't necessarily want to do in order to be able to continue doing what you really want to do, because that's not really fair, because it makes it sound like we don't want to do this and we don't want to do that, where actually that's just not the case. But I think you can get my feeling behind that. We want to race superbikes. We want to race those other classes, but having something like that's different and having something like a bagger class, what harm can it do if we get some more people that perhaps come to our event because they want to see something a little bit different, and then we can move those people to being MotoAmerica fans because maybe the baggers got them in the gate, and now they're exposed to what MotoAmerica really is, and they like it enough that they become MotoAmerica fans. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal for us, is to convert some of those people into being MotoAmerica fans, because frankly, we need more MotoAmerica fans. I mean, we have plenty of room for growth, and we're trying to come up. And I think you just have to realize, like, it's an invitational, Drag Specialties is behind it. They're going to come. I think they're builders in their various companies that produce these type of motorcycles, or not produce the motorcycles themselves, but actually do the work to make them a little tricker. I mean, we're not going to have a bunch of jalopies there, and they're going to be well built. They're going to have they have trick suspension parts. They have they're put together well, and I think they're going to have some guys. I think we're going to see like the Carey Harts of the world that are going to come, and they're going to enjoy that. I think it's just, if we don't take it so seriously and realize it's not replacing. If I issued a press release that said, "Hey, we're getting rid of the Twins Cup, or we're getting rid of the Junior Cup because we're going to replace it with a bagger cup," okay, I can understand that. We're not the hardcore MotoAmerica enthusiast can go to Laguna Seca, and he's going to see exactly what he wants to see. If he wants to stick around because he thinks it's going to be kind of fun to watch these baggers race in one race, then what harm is that? I think sometimes, and I don't want to say that we take ourselves too seriously, because what we do, motorcycle racing is serious, and there's you're not going to find a road racing purist more so than myself. I mean, you guys know my background. I've grown up with this my entire life, and it's a serious thing to me. I take the rider safety serious. I take every single part of it serious. And honestly, it's motorcycle road racing, and motorcycle racing in general it's my passion. So, but I also remember, like, as a kid, like when we first came here, it coincided kind of with the first release of On Any Sunday. And you go to watch On Any Sunday, and I think it drove so many people to motorcycling because it just showed fun. And there was funny stuff in there. Sure, they had the serious parts. There was Mert Lowell trying to win an AMA Grand National Championship. It showed, that these guys get injured doing this. But it also just showed the fun of motorcycling, and it made you just want to go buy a motorcycle. Now, I know it's a bit of a reach to say that, this baggers class is that, but I think it's the beginning of adding some things to our existing events that just make them a bit of fun. And I honestly, and I'm talking to Jensen, and I'm talking to you, Sean, I guarantee when those guys are at Laguna Seca and they go out on the track, you're going to run to find a piece of fence to stand behind to watch them. And you might have a giggle, you might have a laugh, you might think it's really cool. And I just think that's a pretty good thing. And I'm not opposed to us trying some things like that to try to grow our fan base.
It's funny because before Jensen responds, I want to just add one other little thing, with flat track. I mean, what was it? A few years ago, they would put these bikes out on flat track. They'd turn left and they couldn't, they'd be high siding and going crazy. Well, that evolved into the hooligan class, which has become a legitimate racing class. And we're going to have hooligans racing at Indy. But I mean, it sort of came out of a kind of a novelty and turned into that. I'm not saying this Baggers is going to do that, but it's interesting to kind of look at different sides of our passion of motorcycles or our sport. Mini Cup's the same way. I mean, we're going to attract people that are going to be coming for that, and maybe get more involved in seeing what else is going on in MotoAmerica. But they like these ovales or like to see kids doing this kind of thing. I don't know. It's not I don't think it's a PT Barnum Carnival thing quite like maybe Jensen you're thinking. I think there is some novelty involved in it, but I think it's going to be kind of, I can't wait. And I'm biased, obviously. So the thing is, you usually go to Laguna Seca. Are you going to watch that event, Jensen?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like at this point I have a responsibility as a journalist to go witness this event, because my readers and my listeners are going to expect to know what happened or my opinion on how it was executed. You bring up Barnum and Bailey, like that's how I think about it though. Like I sit there and I like kind of rhetorically ask Paul, like what's next? Are you going to have the clown car or a bunch of clown, like stop a little like Volkswagen bus at the top of the corkscrew and we'll see how many clowns pop out of it, and then that'll be the spectacle for the fans to watch? Or if you really want to get more people through the gate, why don't we just put a bunch of stripper poles along the racetrack and see how many guys come through the gates to watch that? Like, where do you want to draw the lines on indoctrinating non-motorcycle racing fans into MotoAmerica and road racing? We can go down that slippery slope if we want, but I think to make a distinction on what you said, Sean, about the hooligan class and the ovales, the hooligan class, at least, those were enthusiasts. Those were fans with motorcycles who were racing with the intent to race. And it was what it was. You don't expect non-professionals to rise to a certain level. With the Mini Cup racing, we're looking at the future, hopefully the future moto or road racing champions, while they're still young, and we can watch their careers as they develop. It serves a purpose, and the purpose there is still to watch them compete on the racetrack. My issue with the bagger classes, it doesn't seem like that's really the case. I think the racing could be interesting. There's always the talk about riding a slow bike fast is probably the most fun you can have on a motorcycle, but it feels really like disingenuous to say like, what harm is there? Because I do feel like there is a harm, because MotoAmerica is the premier motorcycle racing class in the United States. It is the professional road racing series. It stands above all the amateur series. It stands above all the other classes in the United States where we have sport bikes competing. And I feel like you just diluted that brand with this class. You say like, we'll never be MotoGP. Well, one, I think if you don't have that attitude, you never will. But two, why shouldn't MotoAmerica be held to the same standard as MotoGP? They're both professional series. They're both the top in their respective areas. I look at it almost from a branding perspective of you guys abandoning that position, and myself, and I'm sure others that grew up with AMA Pro Road Racing and now MotoAmerica, that's their perspective of the series. This isn't rolling sands and super hooligans and having a good time while we're chugging beers, for a laugh. And I was just at one of their events here in Portland, and it is having a different vibe than, say, American Flat Track, but it's because American Flat Track is the professional series that we can have a super hooligan class. The issue would be if American Flat Track all of a sudden decided that we're not going to be the professional flat tracking series anymore. We're going to be the fun clown car series. That's where we have the issue. And that's the same thing that I have here with MotoAmerica. And that's why I push back on this, because I feel like you guys are giving up the professionalism. quite frankly.
I don't think that's what it's going to be, though. I don't think it's supposed to be a clown car class necessarily. I'm not really honestly completely sure what it is supposed to be. I think I need to find
Sean,
out more information.
How can it not be a clown car class? You're talking about 800, 900-pound motorcycles with bags on them that have, I'm sure you're going to put good suspension. You're going to probably lift them up a little bit, but it's still like a completely inappropriate motorcycle to put on a racetrack. So how can it not be exactly what it is? A motorcycle not intended for racing being raced.
Let me bring this up. Paul and I are old enough to remember when Twin Sports, the Harley bikes were started out. And I mean, there were guys like Nigel Gale. They were good riders. I mean, Eric Bostrom, Aaron Yates, Ben Bostrom. But when that class first started, I'd never talked to Paul about this. I'd like to get his opinion. But as a fan, I remember when that first came out, I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing? You're going to put Sportsters on a road racing course? And I know they adapted them for, racing, which I think the baggers are going to do too. But Paul, do you recall, was that Twin Sports sort of met with the same jaundiced eye in the beginning a little bit?
Oh, I can tell you I was 100% Jensen back in those days. And I made fun of Harley Davidson 883 racing probably more than anybody. I thought it was a stupid idea. I had no time for it, but you know what? I still don't necessarily think it was a great class, but you know what? It had good racing, and it ended up it made it. I'm not saying there's no way that a guy is going from bagger racing to any of our other classes. Let me get that out on the table now. That's not going to happen. With the Harley class, that actually did happen. I mean, the Bostroms raced in that. There was a lot of guys, Aaron Yates raced in it. There was a lot of guys that actually used that because it was a cheap form of racing, and they could get a Harley Davidson dealer or whatever to sponsor them, and they could use that to further their career and move on to the other classes. So no, I was 100% against that because I just didn't see the benefit in it. And I grew, my feelings about it changed over time, and I began to accept it. Now, the bagger thing, let's not get carried away with ourselves and think that this is going to turn into a series within MotoAmerica. That's not going to happen. And, maybe in 2 years, I'll have to come back on here and apologize for saying that. But it's not, it's an invitational attempt to show these bikes and to let these guys race them and to really show. I think these bikes will be a popular thing in the portion of the paddock that we have them, as far as people that are interested in those sort of motorcycles going and looking at some that are extremely well built and well done. It's different for me now because I've been on the other side of the fence. And when I was on the other side of the fence, it was easy for me to be critical and make fun at the people who were trying to do what we're trying to do now. And now I'm in that position of trying to help build this thing from where it was, and where it wasn't a very good place. So it's hard, it's hard not to take things personally when you read what Jensen writes. And, I probably didn't laugh at all because I know what we're trying to do. And it's hard to look at something like that and go, it's the same feeling a manufacturer gets when you write that their brakes suck. I mean, that guy takes it personally because he knows the guy that built the brakes, or he knows the engineer in Japan, or what have you. There's some personal stuff that goes on there. So I'm a little bit the same with MotoAmerica, obviously. So, but I think thinking of it as, stripper poles and clowns is a bit excessive. I think if we just look at it for what it is, if it turns into something that's just horrible, then it won't happen again. But I think it's just one of those things. It's like nothing ventured, nothing gained. And it's very difficult to get people to come to motorcycle races for the pure sport of superbike and all those other classes that the three of us love and think are the greatest things in the world. A lot of the times we feel like if we can just get them there so that they can experience that part of it, then I've never heard anybody, I've never talked to anybody that's gone to a MotoAmerica race for the first time and didn't actually think it was a cool event and that the racing was great. But it's the challenges to get them there for the first time. And whether that's a friend bringing them, or whether it's something that they read about in their bagger magazine, if there is such a thing, I'm sure there is, that entices them to maybe go to Laguna Seca and have a look at this. And if we can convert those into MotoAmerica fans, then I think it's a good thing. But I understand where Jensen comes from, because as I said, I've been on that side of the fence and I've had the same feelings about other things that he's having about the baggers thing. So, I mean, I'm not mad about it by any means. Because I totally understand it, because I've been there.
Paul, I got a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I'm in charge of the damn questions.
The tables have turned.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you have a guy who has his own podcast on our podcast.
But you talk about the people that are going to line up on the fence, and I 100% agree with you. I think that we're going to be vying for space, elbows to elbows, especially around the corkscrew, to see this happen. But do you think those people are going to be there because of the racing and the competition that's occurring on the racetrack, or do you think they're going to be there because of the spectacle and the prospect of seeing, an 800-pound motorcycle wind up in the dirt?
I would say B.
Yeah, that's my issue.
But you know what? There's I will go to Costa Mesa Speedway is an amazing show. I don't know if you've ever been to it. And it's held through the summer, and I think it's on Saturday nights now, maybe Friday nights, but I think it changes back and forth. Sometimes it's Friday night, sometimes it's Saturday night, but it's weekly. And the speedway racing is great by itself, but they might even have it more than once now, but they used to have, or they still have, a Harley Davidson night, where these guys, they get to race on the speedway track on the bike, but they have to show that they actually rode the bike to the race. And obviously it has to be a Harley Davidson. And it's a bit of a spectacle. I mean, there's guys, you can imagine, they're just crashing their brains out, but the people go crazy for it and they like it. And it's a sideshow to what is already a good show. Now, those people love the speedway part of it too, but that's a little extra special thing that they do on the side. And maybe that brings some people in there that haven't been to speedway before. I see your point. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand that there's going to be people wanting to watch that because they're going to think something, bad's going to happen. That's just human nature. It's why there's traffic around here, because when you pass a crash on the freeway, people slow down because they got to see if there's, what blood and bodies they can see. But
right.
I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult thing. And again, I see Jensen's point, but I think if we just take a step back and not take it so seriously and take it for what it is, and it's not a MotoAmerica class. It's this one-off thing that we want to try. We think it'll be cool. We think people will have fun with it, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. All right, Paul, I'll throw you a bone on this one.
Thanks.
I agree with you. I agree with you. The core purpose of motorcycles is to have fun. The reason I do this job, and I'm sure the reason you guys got into it, is because you find enjoyment in riding motorcycles and being in the motorcycle community. And the whole purpose of this whole thing is to have fun. And the day that motorcycle stops being fun for me is probably the day I sell all the bikes, or the day that, doing the asphalt and rubber and the podcast starts tainting motorcycles in a way that makes it no longer fun for me. That'll be the day that I close those down and get back to just pure riding, because I'm a firm believer that motorcycles should be fun, and it's about enjoyment, and it's about living your life, because we're only here for a short period of time, and motorcycles is a great way to do that. So I'm right there with you in the sense that the racing should be fun, the racing experience should be fun, and all that jazz. And Sean, you brought up earlier in the podcast about this responsibility, or do I feel a responsibility as a journalist to advocate the motorcycle industry and what goes on in it, to loosely paraphrase your words.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
I don't feel like I need to be the cheerleader for the motorcycle industry, but there is a part of me that is always going to be that enthusiast that believes that motorcycles should be fun. So, I do see the perspective of here's something to be the intermission to these serious races for these professionals that can be a distraction that can get us back to what that core thing in motorcycling is in terms of enjoyment, in terms of having a good time with your friends. And I get it. My biggest issue though is just it's on a larger scale of like what is best for MotoAmerica in the long run? What is best for motorcycle racing in the long run? What is best for the motorcycle industry in the long run? And we're at a really interesting time. We're at a really interesting crossroads for all of those things. We talked earlier about, motorcycle consumer news closing. There is a huge shift in motorcycle journalism in terms of publications that are still in business and how those publications that are in business still operate and the independence and the voices that they have. There's a huge shift in the buying tendencies and trends of the consumers. There's a huge shift in what manufacturers are doing in terms of the products that they're bringing to market. You look at transportation just in the larger scale of things for the next 20, 30 years. Like, I don't have any kids right now, so I could probably make the argument that when I have children, I might not have to teach them how to drive a car because transportation will have changed so greatly that we don't drive cars ourselves anymore. And how does that affect motorcycles going down the line? So there's this huge shift. And like, there's a part of me that as someone that is a stakeholder in this industry and who is also a stakeholder as an enthusiast and a consumer of protecting this thing that we love so dearly. And that's where I think I come at the bagger racing, because I just don't want to see MotoAmerica do anything that's going to hurt the MotoAmerica brand. I want MotoAmerica to be around. I want motorcycle racing in the U.S. to thrive. I want the motorcycle industry to do well because I love motorcycles and I love motorcycle racing and I love professional motorcycle racing in the United States. But sometimes it doesn't feel like we're making the best decisions for that. And I think, the previous administration before MotoAmerica was a great example of, every decision they made, I could sit there and be like, that's the exact opposite of what you should be doing in that situation. And that's part of the reason we've gotten to where we are with some of these issues. And I just don't want to see us go down that same road. Mm-hmm. And if it means I have to make jokes about pie contests, so be it.
Yeah, I get that. You just have to also realize that as a group, MotoAmerica wants nothing more than to grow the professional road racing series in the United States. We like superbike racing. We like all of our classes. We like the way that it's working now. We like the fact that we have a junior cup that we can feed the other classes to. And the ultimate goal is for us to feed the world championship with American riders so that we can all sit back on a Sunday morning really early and watch MotoGP and have an American that we can root for. That's the goal. In order to continue, in order to try and obtain that goal, if we have to do some things on the side that might be fun, like this baggers thing, to maybe get more people to come to our events so that we can continue to do what we really want to do, then that just might be the case. It's very difficult to get people to come to live events. It just is. It's not like it used to be. Things have changed. And if we have to do some things that are a little bit different and a little bit outside the box to get people to come so that we can continue to do what we really want to do, which is race superbikes at the highest level so that we can build riders to go elsewhere so that we can have somebody to cheer for and that we can show that America aren't a bunch of pussies and don't know how to road race anymore, then so be it. There's also a thing where like, okay, you would know better than me. I don't know the numbers. I don't know the popularity of baggers as it relates to the motorcycle industry in the US. But I have a feeling they're popular. I have a feeling they're getting more popular. And it's probably works the same way for manufacturers as it does for us. They sometimes have to produce motorcycles. The guys making these motorcycles might be the diehard sport bike guys. And they're like, okay, would I rather be building a sport bike? Sure, I would. Would I rather be building the greatest new R1 in the world? Sure. But you know what? In order to continue working on my R1 project, we need to start building some of these baggers so that people will buy them, so that we can make some money and we can continue to strive forward with the bikes that we really want to build. Now, I might be speaking out of school and they may not believe that, but it also gives opportunities for manufacturers who are making these baggers to have them in our paddock so that people can walk by and look at them and potentially buy one, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense.
So there's a lot to it. And I think from the outside, it's easy to say, and again, I'm with you 100%, because if I was in your position, and I was in your position a while ago, I would be making the same fun of this thing. But sometimes if you just take a step back and realize and take it for what it is, it's not a bad thing. Would people rather watch baggers in a race, or would they rather stare at an empty racetrack for half an hour? I mean, I just look at it as just another piece of producing a good show so people come and watch. And if that's what it is, that's what it is. And I honestly, we're going to be adding some more things to the Laguna Seca program. Laguna Seca has been taken over by new people, as we all well know. They've lost World Superbike. We're trying to come into Laguna Seca, and we're trying to build a motorcycle event that brings people into the area, that brings people to the racetrack. They have an enjoyable time, and they come back the following year. And it's a transition year for Laguna Seca. And honestly, there's some pressure on us that we need to give them a good event for our sake and for their sake. And this is part of that. And there's going to be some other things that we're going to try there as well.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to add too, I mean, we're kind of over what we usually run in a podcast, but I did want to say one thing real quick. And it's that these bikes are actually going to be teched as well. I mean, they're going to have like belly pans to contain anything with, just like all of our bikes are in our series. There's safety things that are being put on these bikes or, being done. So it's not just going to be, pull a bagger out of a showroom and run it around the track. They're going to be prepped. So there's some thought behind that fits into our whole MotoAmerica mold. But I don't know. I just, wait and see, I guess, Jensen, is kind of what I'm saying. We know you'll be there. We hope you will. I always see you at Laguna Seca, so we'll hope you'll be there this year, and we'll talk about it after we see it and see what you think.
Yeah, I mean,
then,
I go into it with an open mind. I mean, obviously, I have my opinions now, but I like to think that I have the ability to change my thoughts afterwards. I just want to say something really quick that, at the end of the day, brands are owned by their consumers. Brands aren't owned by the companies that produce them. Nike might own the copyright and the trademark to the name Nike and the swoosh, but the Nike values are owned by everyone that's ever bought a Nike product. And it's the same with MotoAmerica. And my hardest felt thing is that events like this bagger race are so far outside of what the values of the MotoAmerica brand is, as someone like myself holds it, or someone like you, Paul, if you were outside of it, or any of the other listeners that are road racing fans, that it feels like a betrayal. And we've been through a lot with American motorcycle road racing. And I don't know how many betrayals we can have where we still keep coming back, and you say, it gets people to come through the gates, and we don't want to see the fans disappear. Well, the fans have disappeared, and that's my issue. And that's my worry, is the fans have already said, you've betrayed me too many times. I'm not coming back. And any business person will tell you it's 3 times harder acquiring a new customer than it is to keep an existing one. And we're in that stage now where we're having to acquire new customers to motorcycle racing. And it's just tough. Like I just worry. My whole perspective is I want to see you succeed. I want to see this baggers race to be amazing and fun and have a good time. I'll stand right next to you, Paul, and we can compare notes. But I'm just worried of what this is going to mean in the long run for MotoAmerica as a brand. Is it going to still be taken serious? Because we already have an issue of being taken seriously abroad. There is that feeling in the foreign paddocks that America can't produce serious road racers. there's a stigma now, and we have to overcome that. And I think it's a great challenge, because I think absolutely we have the talent. It's just a matter of putting them on the right bikes and in the right teams and supporting them in the right ways. And I think we can go out there, we can kick their butts, but we do have a stigma that we have to overcome, and I want to see us do that. And I'm not sure if things like this are the right strategy.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think we've come a long way, and I think you'll agree with that. I mean, when we took this thing over, you bury people at what, 6 feet? I mean, this thing was dug 4 feet, so it was very close to road racing in this country, just getting the last shovel of dirt thrown on its face, and it would be over. So we took it over at a point where it was very, very low. And we've made significant gains every single year. And I know you can't argue that, and you won't argue that because it's true. But, we've made significant gains with everything across the line. First of all, we started with the racing. We got that back on track, the classes, the rules, etc. And ever since then, we've been working on ticket sales and marketing and all the stuff that goes.
And TV package, you guys back on TV, which is a huge thing.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, there's such a huge investment being made here, and really, it comes down to one guy, Richard Varner, who's made these investments, loves what he's doing, loves what we're doing. He's the most positive guy that we have, honestly, because he's he's the one spending the money. I'm like, how? But he loves it, and he can see where we're going. He's a successful businessman. So I leave that part of the business to him totally. And we're getting there. And this is just something we're trying. It's not, again, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we move on and we try stuff. But it's like we sometimes have to start thinking out of the box a little bit to get our series to grow. And that's what we're trying to do. And again, some of the things we're going to try aren't going to work, and some of the things we try are going to work. We're just going to have to play it out. It's funny because we started this talking about press releases, and I just got a press release that Brock Tickle is going to ride for the JGRMX team. And anybody who knows the backstory on that knows that Brock didn't pass a drug test for performance-enhancing drugs. And he was out of the sport for 2 years, but the press release doesn't mention that. So there you have it. So that blank needs to be filled in when you tackle that today. Okay, Jensen?
I don't know if that story will be on Asphalt and Rubber, but if something like that.
I think you should do a story on press releases and use that as Exhibit A.
He'll have it on his his brother or his sister website, Dirt and Nobbies or whatever. So, one other thing I want to say, and we can wrap this up, but Jensen, I assure you, we are not going to have stripper poles, and we're not going to have clown cars. Although you should see the rental car I bring to every round; it's truly a clown car. Richie Doan, who was with Yoshimura, used to call it a one-door hatchback because I usually try to get the smallest car I can find, and me in a small car doesn't look quite right. So there's already a clown car part of that, but I don't put it in the show. So, but hey, I think we've come to the end here. You want to wrap it up, Paul? And thank you, Jensen, for being on. We really appreciate it. We had a great conversation. This is, I think, our longest
68
podcast
minutes.
we've had
You guys
to date,
are lightweight.
so,
You gotta step it up a little bit.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's fun talking to you guys.
No, I appreciate you coming on, and it's nice to talk to somebody that has similar values and beliefs as far as journalism and how it should be and how it not necessarily is anymore. So congrats on your website, and keep up the good work. And I expect that when we do something right, you'll let people know. And then when we do something wrong, you can make fun of us. So have at it, and keep up the good work, and we'll chat again soon. And also thanks to all our listeners. And I think today they got a little different perspective than our normal show that usually features a racer or somebody else from our MotoAmerica paddock. We changed it up a little bit with Jensen, and hopefully they enjoyed that. And it's something we can continue to do and bring in some different people from the industry and have educated chats about it. So again, thanks guys for joining us. And Sean, you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Paul. See you, Jensen. Take care.
Hey, Sean, do you know what the next best thing to actually being at a MotoAmerica race is?
Yeah, of course. It's listening to me recite every model designation of Yamaha YZR 500 that 3-time World Grand Prix champion Wayne Rainey ever raced, including his 1993 OWE0. Is that it?
Damn you, Bice. No, 100% not it. It's MotoAmerica Live Plus. All you do is subscribe and you basically get to watch all on-track activity for the entire weekend in every class at every single one of our rounds. And if you subscribe now, it's only $54.99, but that offer doesn't stay on the table forever. So $54.99, you got to do this, Sean.
Of course, Paul, you're right. You're always right. And, like always, MotoAmerica Live Plus, it's the next best thing to being there. And we're there.